In this episode, I'm speaking with Barbara Pagano, author of the book, The 60-Something Crisis, How to Live an Extraordinary Life in Retirement. I think you'll find the process Barbara lays out in the book is applicable beyond just retirement. Cue the music.
Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast, brought to you by Career Pivot. This podcast is where those of us in the second half of life come together to discuss how to repurpose our careers for the 21st century. Come listen to career experts give you proven strategies. Listen to people like you tell their stories on how they repurpose their careers. And finally, get your questions answered. Your host, Mark Miller, has made 6 career pivots over the last 30 years. He understands this is not about jumping out of the frying pan into a fire, but rather to create a plan where you make clear, actionable steps or pivots to a better future career. Are you ready to repurpose your career?
Welcome to episode 288 of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. My name is Mark Miller, and I'll be your host every Monday for discussion on what it's like to repurpose your career. In this episode, I'm speaking with Barbara Pagano, author of The 60-Something Crisis, How to Live an Extraordinary Life in Retirement. I think you will find the process Barbara lays out in the book is applicable beyond just retirement. Let me read you some of her story from her website. Hi, I'm Barbara Pagano. Despite graduate degrees in human behavior and many successful crossings onto new life stages, I even planned a very successful midlife crisis for myself in my mid-40s, everything about retirement, the word we most use for pivot time in life at 65, didn't fit me. If there was a yellow brick road to happiness and joy, I wanted to be on it. But where was the road? And who was I going to be now? It shouldn't be so hard, but it was. I became a consummate learner of the current literature on aging, retirement, unretirement, productive longevity, well-being, and happiness, discovering that work identity is an extraordinary strong component of who we are, and that productivity equals better health according to the latest research on longevity and well-being, was a watershed. Working until 85, not 65, is the new retirement for me and millions of others. Volunteering, traveling just to travel, and not earning money, it doesn't work for me, and it doesn't work for millions of others. Together, we can be voices of new ways of living in the second half of life. However, before we get to the episode, let's have a word from our sponsor, Career Pivot. The Career Pivot membership community is a group of people from all over the U.S. and Canada with diverse backgrounds. This community where everyone is there to help everyone else figure out what they want to do in the second half of life and then make it happen. Many have made changes that they didn't know existed or was possible when they came to the community. They learned from each other and broadened their horizons on what was really possible. Let's hear what Sarah had to say about being part of the community.
So, for example, when I was first exploring the idea of moving into higher ed and I was scheduling informational interviews or just networking meetings with people, I decided it would be helpful to have business cards. I was sort of struggling with how to, what kind of verbiage I should use. And it seemed like I needed 2 different ones and whatever. And I was able to post what I was thinking, my sort of designs on the community website, and people were gracious enough to give me really helpful feedback. So those kinds of things were really helpful and just sort of kept me moving along. Like, I feel like if I wasn't in the community, I could easily have stalled out at many different points along the way. And so it sort of kept my momentum going and kept me hopeful.
I am recruiting new members. If you are interested in learning more about the endeavor, please go to careerpivot.com/community. Before we get to the episode, for the second time in 288 episodes, I did not check to see if my trusty podcast microphone was selected in Zoom. I was so busy helping Barbara get her audio set up correctly that I failed to check mine. I recorded my side of the conversation using the microphone in my trusty MacBook Air. I re-recorded sections of my side of the conversation, but not all of them. Barbara sounds wonderful, and that's more important. Now on to my discussion with Barbara Pagano. Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast. I have the real joy of having Barbara Pagano on the podcast, and she is the author of The 60-Something Crisis, How to Live an Extraordinary Life in Retirement. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, Mark, I am glad to be here, and I thank you so much for this opportunity.
Why did you write this book?
Oh, it sounds painful to even go back and tell you that with my degrees in human behavior and all of my success professionally, I turned 65 and did what 10,000 people, maybe a little less, are doing right now. And that is they're sitting down and asking that terrible, awful question of what's next. Laying before me was the biggest transition in my entire life. And I did not understand that. I thought it was very simply a question of what I want to do. I wasted a lot of time. So I wrote the book that I wish I would have had, that somebody could not answer the questions specifically for me, but could give me a guide, and I could have a better understanding about what I was getting into, what I needed to know, and what I needed to do.
This process works for more than just for retirement. So I want my listeners to listen to this, and even if you're not retiring, this may be of useful, as some of you have been in industries that have died and been thrown out.
I agree with what you're saying, but I also think that we need to understand, which was, as a student, I had to learn, was this transition has a couple of little whammies going with it. Okay, you are 65 years old. You are facing now the last third of your life. So we have a last chance here, which, like it or not, that's the reality of the situation. And then the other piece is we're the young old. Okay, we feel, we can feel 65. Or we can be 65 or 70 or 80 or whatever it is, but we don't feel that way. We still feel young. And so we're like the young old. And there's this magic about 65 where there's just this unknown glide that many of us start on, that happiness is going to be a part of. And we're not going to have to do very much to make that happen. So I think there are similarities around the what's next and the transition, but this particular transition has some little craziness attached to it.
The reason I say this is the fact that even if someone's not getting ready to retire but going through a major transition, this process works.
Okay, I would agree with that.
And it's everything from, like we talked before we got on, it's about friends and relationships. It is, one of the things I did when I was several years ago was I started questioning. I read the book Necessary Endings by Dr. Henry Cloud.
Yes.
And it got me to ask the question, I've been in Austin for 40 years. Why am I still here? In retrospect, I couldn't give you a good answer.
Is it where you wanted to be?
It's where I'd been. It's inertia. And the Austin I moved to in 1978 wasn't the Austin of 2016. And so, okay, why am I still here? That's when we started exploring being expats. I like the part one, the new defining moment. A lot of that's around relationships.
It is.
Do you want to take a few seconds and talk about?
Well, the new defining moment for many of us is around the word retirement. And when we look at the baggage that we carry with us, and I've listened to your podcasts, and there's a lot of talk about changing our mindset, and changing our mindset around the word retirement, because as much research as I've done, we're just going to have this word for a while. There is no new word out there that we're going to adapt. And I think that retirement hangs a lot of people up. And the new defining moment, along with a redefinition of work, of retirement, then we have this whole big longevity thing, which I find many people understand that we're living longer, but they are not applying it. They are not owning it for themselves. And so it's one thing to say, yes, we're all getting older. And yes, we have a bonus of 30 years. But the new defining moment has to do with owning that and saying, I have another 25 or 30 years. And then the last part of the defining moment, I think that's new is we're the first generation. We are pioneers. You and I are pioneers in an industry around aging and helping people with second careers. I'm looking at the last third of life, hoping that people can get to the end and not do what the research says that we've done for the last 60 years. And that is get to the end and say, gee, I wish I had lived life more for myself. And when I understood that, that was like bingo for me. I'm not going to do that.
I've read God knows how many times around on your deathbeds, no one goes, gosh, I wish I had spent more time in the office.
Well, I replaced it with two questions that we are asking. And that was, did I know myself and did I live my life the way that I want to live? So yes, I think that we have gained a great perspective on balance. And each of us chooses how we're going to do that. But the new defining moment is indeed around this age of looking now at the last third of life and becoming very self-aware and making some decisions.
Yes, there's no question that, and I'm a big believer, number one, know thyself.
Mm-hmm.
And most of us don't.
No, we do not.
I really liked your part two, which is a future that is truly your own. And you break it down into 4 portals. And the first one is geography of place.
You know, it was very important for me to create a guide and not a how-to book. The book that I wrote is very similar to a sailing guide. You know, that sailing guide will get you into the anchorage, and then you decide where you're going to drop anchor. One of the things that I discovered, because I was a student for a very long time, after I got up off the couch, I said, you know, there's some things I need to know. And one of the very first ones was how important happiness and well-being is connected to the place we choose to live. And many of us have a choice at 65, especially the way work is going. We have a choice now, what's going to be outside our windows and what's going to be out on our street. And I just think that that's overlooked sometimes. Richard Florida has done a lot of work around the happiness that's associated with geography of place. Geography of place is not to be confused with the 10 best cities to live in or whatever that list is. Because if you don't ride a bike, you're really not going to care that this city has great bike trails. But geography of place was the very first thing that I wanted people to understand, that you have a choice here. And if you know where your geography of place is, hallelujah. But many people don't know. And so we have to go find it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been quoted many times by people around here that I've claimed that the decision on picking the place is an experiential decision and not a logical one.
That's very true. It's a very intuitive one as well. And it's not a vacation kind of visit. It's a go to a place and look around and say, can I live here? How do I feel about this? Is it giving me everything I want? And I love talking to people about this because sometimes it's New York City or Chicago, and other times it's a Kentucky lake or a desert or, you know, some other place in the world. And if you can't go there and live, then get yourself there as much as you can.
Yeah, I mean, we get a lot of folks who decide they want to go to Cancun or Puerto Vallarta because they vacationed there so many times. And I said, have you actually been there in July?
I told the story in the book about the man I was coaching, and we were talking about geography of place. And he said, well, I'm going to go to Arizona. And I said, well, what do you like about Arizona? I don't know. I've never been. Whoa. So there's work to be done in geography of place. When my husband retired from Delta, he said, take me any place you want to take me, but get me out of Atlanta. And it took me 7.5 years to find the geography of place for us at that time. Yeah. So it's not a simple task sometimes, but boy, start working on it. It's important.
So the second one is yield, the second portal. Tell me about that.
I'm a big believer in well-being. And in well-being, you're going to have relationships and you're going to have some freedom and you're also going to have work. So whatever your work is, I want you to begin to explore that. And I don't want you, I think I told the story in the book about when I would say, okay, what's going to be your work? People would recoil at me and say, oh, no, you don't understand. I'm not working. I want to get away from that. I don't ever want to do that again. And so we have to understand that, the majority of people maybe are not like you or like me. They're in dead-end jobs. They're in jobs that didn't support what their creative talents were. And so now in retirement, if you and I are talking to them about careers and work, they need some education here. So work to me is whatever you're going to choose to spend your time and talents on. You can get paid or you can get unpaid. If you're going to explore this and make some decisions about it, the way that I propose in yield is let's not look at what you want to do so quickly or what you could do. Let's look at what do you want back? And in my experience, I went down a couple of paths and then discovered, no. I need to have work that I can do from anywhere. That was the number one yield that I needed, was doing work from wherever I wanted to be. Number two, my yield was it was a place to be creative. And number three, my yield was I'd like to make money. For those of us over 65, I find that making money sometimes is a subject that we don't want to talk about. And I want to talk about that because I think it's a very viable place for well-being. And I think that we're living longer. Our money may not last. And for Pete's sake, what's wrong with making money?
We're all motivated by different things. I've often talked about the fact that I usually say there are 6 things that we want to get out of, or possibly we want to get out of work. One is the mission. If the mission is right, I find people in the nonprofit and the military, if the mission is right, they don't care about anything else.
Okay.
There is the public recognition. Third is the financial reward. Then the last 3 don't cost anything, which is the pat in the back from your boss, your team, or your client. For me, it's always been, because I spent most of my career in technology and learning and development, I like the thank you when I'm done from my client. In other words, I soared when I did something. I taught a class and people said, wow, that was great.
So the acknowledgement piece.
Yes.
Okay.
But it's the point is acknowledgement from who?
Mm-hmm.
Most of my career, my bosses never understood what I did. So when they said, Mark, you did a great job, my response usually is go away. And the key piece is we are all different. We are all motivated by different things.
And I think I'd really like to add here that my choice was to pursue work that had the possibility of potential financial reward. And this does not have to be your choice. You can choose to create a garden. You can choose to write articles, be a volunteer. I don't really care what the work is, as long as you know that that's a very important part of your life in the last third of your life. So where are you going to live? How are you going to find that place? And then let's explore what you need back from the investment of your time and energy.
Now, the third portal is freedom. And I really like this because I think this is really key.
If you talk to anyone about retirement, they see freedom. They see, oh, wow, I don't have to go do that anymore. But when you look at freedom and you break it down, there are two kinds of freedom. There are the go-to freedoms, like what am I going to do? Where do I want to go? What do I want to see? And then there is the more internal freedom, and that is what the freedom to be a different kind of person. Do I want to be more generous? Do I want to be more loving? Do I want to be more selfish about the time and energy that I have in my life? So the two kinds of freedoms around, what you want to go to, and then the internal freedom, those are two kind of freedoms that you really need to explore as you're finding your way in the last third.
Yeah, I think one of the scary parts is freedom. I now have freedom.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you get to choose. And for some who've never chosen in their lives, then that's kind of scary.
Well, I'm getting ready to write an article about, actually the title is going to be Failure to Launch. Because I think that when you do talk to pre-retirees and retirees, they know or can come up with very easily the ideas that would make them happier or the things that they want to do. But something happens here in this age, from 65, 70 is right around the corner. And that's a very different kind of mindset when you say that you're 70. We know from studies that confidence starts going down. You're losing your structure. You're losing a community of people. And so even though we know there is a failure to take action on the yield part, the work part, the geography of place part, or what we're talking about, which is the freedom part, there is a failure to launch. I find that very often.
Yeah, I have Diane Winger's been on my podcast several times, and one of the things she talks about is if you wait until you're ready to do something, you probably never do it.
Yes, that's very true. And I would say that if you are 65 and you're asking what's next, I would think that there's a big red flag going up, because in this big transition, and the retirees that, I was in leadership development for years and years, and I loved it. And I had the opportunity for senior level people to share in their leadership development. And I went back to all those people after they retired and said, well, how was that? And basically they said, not good, Barbara. I should have paid more attention. I should have thought more about what I wanted to do. And I should have put in place some things so that I didn't end up after the honeymoon of retirement and then start thinking about, okay, now what am I going to do? So failure to launch, I think, is a very important part of getting ready and making a commitment with intentions to do something.
So your fourth portal is kinship.
Don't you love that?
Yeah. Tell me about that.
If you go to the longevity influencers, the people who are really studying the longevity piece of our lives, they will tell you that it is time now to cull your friendships, to look at your friendships. And I love I think I created in the book the visual of the friendship mountain, where we have at the very top our best friends. And the research will say at the very top of the mountain, you need 3 best friends, and one of them cannot be your spouse or partner. That is very hard work to get 3 people at the top of your mountain who are your best friends. And as you grow older, you're going to lose people. So the friendship piece, making friends, culling friends. Have we forgotten how to do this? It's a critical piece. And I mean that with an understanding that this is not easy. Okay, it's much easier to sit and watch TV than it is to fill up your calendar with places so you can go out and meet new people. But calling your friendships and then also looking at the people in your life, whether it's family or who it is, who are not contributing in a way that's positive for you. And I love people that I meet who they have their blood family way over there someplace, but they've created their own family. And it's a phenomenon that's very, very successful. So we are very good about, the research says that we're very good about spending time with family. But where we're not good is making friends. And you and I talked about it just a little bit before we started recording. And that was making friends that maybe are different than how we grew up, what our values are. One of the authors that I talked to called the middle ring friends, that were very good at creating friendships with people who are like-minded. But now perhaps we can create different kinds of friendships. So the kinship piece extends from family to friends, and then it also goes into marriages. And so you look at your marriage and you have I love the stat that said not very many married couples are talking about exactly what they see as their life in retirement. They're going to retire, but are they really talking about what that looks like? And the challenge there is it could be two very different pictures.
Yeah, there's no question. I commonly joke the fact that I've worked all over the world. I can culturally integrate anywhere. My wife has not done that.
Mm-hmm.
If you told me 5 years ago, I'd be living in Mexico with a very, very happy wife.
With a very happy wife?
Oh, yes. And that I would have told you were smoking, and yes, you were inhaling. Very often you need to go experience these things.
Mm-hmm.
All I could do was encourage my wife to explore it and experience it. And then you see whether it works.
Mm-hmm.
And just like in your book, you talk about your husband, the two of you go to San Miguel de Allende part of the year, and he stays in the U.S. because that's not for him.
Yeah, I think that you don't have to be afraid to have the conversation and have two very different pictures about how you want to live the rest of your life, where you want to live it, what you want to do, how you see things happening, what you want to get involved in. And if they're different, the most important piece there is let's be honest with one another and we can work this out. And often I've interviewed about 12 couples now who are, and they keep coming my way, who are choosing married but living apart. And that's a little bit about what you're talking about. When I'm in Nashville or San Miguel and I have a 42-year-old marriage and I love my husband and he loves me, but he loves Pensacola and that's his geography of place. The people who get confused about that, first of all, were the kids. The kids were like, okay, now what's going on here? And we, simply had to explain it to them and they got it. And friends get it. And to be honest with you, I get a lot of comments about, oh, I like that idea. So the kinship piece may extend to kids and to having conversations with them. There's an awful lot of people who are choosing to grandparent well, and grandparenting is at the top of their list. And I choose to be a crackerjack grandparent, but I also choose to work and to have a geography of place. And all the other four things, all of those have to go into a well-lived life.
Hopefully the listeners can hear this doesn't just apply to retirement. It applies to so many other things in our lives.
That's true.
And I just thought it was interesting being put in the context of retirement, and going back to your comment, I had Andrew Scott on the podcast a year or two ago, and talking about, he would talk about the fact that your mortality rate, you have 10 more years at the age of 65 than you would have 20 years ago.
Yes.
And so you've just been given 10 more years of life. What are you going to do with it?
Well, I have to add this piece. I wrote it down this morning on the Today Show. There was a new poll out. It was a poll done in the United States and Canada. The poll is around the maximum age for political office. What is the maximum age for political office? The answer was 70. So amidst everything that you and I are talking about, whether it's work or changing your life, you are living in a culture that is youth-oriented, that does not expect a lot out of you. And, if there's anything that I'm selling, it's aspiration, it's urgency, because it's the last third of your life. And, I do agree with you, Mark, when you say, and one of the things that's happening is the feedback that I'm getting from the book is the 50-year-olds. The 50-year-olds are contacting me and saying, this is a book for us. And I was surprised at that. But maybe that's a little bit about what you're saying, is that everything that is experienced in the context of retirement should and can be experienced earlier.
There's no question that because so many of us, we got into our careers, we got married, we bought homes, we had a mortgage, we put our kids through college. We did all these things for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And very often, it's like I often talk about the fact that when I started my career, I became an actor. I played role. And after a while, I didn't even know that I was an actor. It was when I hit my 50s that suddenly staying in character was exhausting. I turned myself into somebody I wasn't. And that's not uncommon, because many of us, as we go through life, we just kind of follow the default path. And this is now the time to, in your 50s, before you get ready to retire, or if you're like me, I never want to, quote, retire, is who the hell am I? Why am I doing this?
One very important point for your listeners is to have an understanding of what is an extraordinary life. And for many of us, we are bombarded with super athletes or people doing extraordinary things after they start a business. But for most of us, we are ordinary people. And so how does an ordinary person now intentionally live an extraordinary life? So here is your picture. We all know how to ride a bike, and we all know that at one time or another, we've taken our hands off the handlebars and we have that wee feeling. So the extraordinary life piece is how can you get more of that we feeling in life? And it isn't taking huge risks. It isn't being maybe an extraordinary anything or any person. It's just how can we get those moments, whether it's walking in our geography of place, or whether it's understanding the benefits that we just got from investing our time and energy, or whether it's being with family and friends. What is that we factor? And boy, do we all need more of that.
Barbara, when someone finishes reading your book, what do you want them to do?
In leadership development, I worked with very successful people who were already good at what they were doing. They wanted to be better. And if you want to be better, then you would do what I would advise a leader who is very, very busy. Years ago, we would give them 3 things that they needed to change. That is not going to work for many of us. Just find one thing. It can be one portal that you look at. It can be a decision to do one thing a week that will add to your knowledge and your experience about how you want to live your life. It could be 1 hour that you take a week and you increase your self-awareness and say, okay, what is it that I really want to do? So I don't want people to do 3 things or 2 things. I just want them to do one thing differently to explore.
Yes, I think it's key. This is the time you're giving people permission to explore who they are. So, Barbara, if this has been great, if someone wanted to reach out and contact you, and more importantly, buy your book, how might they do that?
You should go to Amazon right now and purchase a book. I think that you should read the reviews so that you understand what the reaction has been from other people. And if you want to contact me, all of that information is available on my website, which is the60somethingcrisis.com.
And all of those links will be in the show notes. Barbara, thank you very much for being on the Repurpose Your Career podcast.
It has been my pleasure. I wish you well, Mark Miller.
Hope you found that discussion a bit enlightening. Even if you are not near retirement, I think this is a worthwhile read. Take a moment, go to careerpivot.com, sign up for the weekly Career Pivot Insights newsletter, which is sent out every Sunday. You'll get a weekly update on this podcast, white papers, and new blog posts. I recently published my latest white paper, Ageism, the Last Acceptable Bias. If you are subscribed to the newsletter, you have already had the opportunity to download it. While there, do not forget to check out the Career Pivot community, which can be found at careerpivot.com/community. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Look for Career Pivot on Facebook and LinkedIn. You'll find me on Twitter at Career Pivot. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. You will find all of the show notes at careerpivot.com/episode-288. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Podbeam, Overcast, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, and lots of other places where podcasts can be found. In fact, this podcast can be found on the Repurpose Your Career podcast channel on YouTube. Hope to see you next Monday for another episode of Repurpose Your Career podcast.